now. And Maria and John, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this. We had initially planned to do this as a live show from your site, but you're in Sweden, aren't you? So so look forward to finding all about your latest discoveries. I'll mute myself now. If anyone wants to ask any questions, put them in the chat box and we'll have a Q&A session afterwards, and you can ask questions yourself or I can ask them on your behalf. So I'll hand over to you now, Maria and John.
Well, thank you. Yes, it is very sad that we are in Sweden and not at el-Silsila. I'm hoping that some of our team members are with us here today, including Mustafa Bedri. He's the director of the inspectorate of el-Silsila. Yes, John, he has an acute injury to his back with a herniated thoracic disc. That isn't very good thing to have when you're lying down doing archaeology. So we have to postpone and hopefully we can come back to you guys and we can do a on-site lecture another time. So with that being said, we also would like to say thank you to all of you for being here and for the organizers, of course, to allowing us to be here.
Thank you very much.
So let's start and it's nice to see that there are people from all over the world, not just England. Let's see if we can, there we got share, and you can all see that, I hope. Yeah, there we go. So the idea today is, of course, we wanted to do this from site, but as it is now, then we will, let's see if we can get that down. Never mind. Oops. We will do an update from the last season, which we came back from in October last year. So it's still very fresh and it's news on all.
I've still got sand in my ears.
Yeah, I'm sure we will have that till the day we die. So a little bit on the structure, which shows this image. Our photographer, he had an Egyptian student teaching him how to do archaeological photography, and this is the structure of our photographer's mind. So it was suitingly for the topic of structure. We will talk a little bit about the Temple of Sobek, the necropolis, and a rock art site that we label as number 2 on the east bank, and those were the 3 areas that we were active in during our last period or season. But we always, in respect of the people who never listen to us and don't know much about the site, we will do an introduction to each one of those sites before we go into the news. So you will have a little bit of an introduction to the site, the different sites, and then go on with things. I would like to ask everyone not to share the images from this lecture, as there's several unpublished pieces that are included. So I know that it's recorded and so forth, but please don't photograph and put up on social media and so forth. So ready?
Ready when you are, madam.
Let's go then. We never start a presentation before we introduce the entire team, and that is because we simply couldn't do this as a 2-man job. We are in depth of all our team members, international Egyptians, and the inspectors and all of us coming together. And it's these people on the photo that makes the mountain move. Literally, yes. So this is the team that we had with us during our last season. So we've been an archaeological mission. Can you see the text up in the corner? Because I got the zoom control. Can you see the... Sorry, Sarah?
We can see it, yeah.
Oh, good. Okay.
We can see the slide.
Yeah.
This is archaeological mission since 2012. Is that
great?
what
Great. Yeah. So we've been on site since 2012 as an official mission. We did some initial surveying work already 2007, 2008, and 11. And then with the revolution, the ministry changed their directions and said that if you want to continue working, you will need to be an official mission.
Which we are.
So that's how it all started. We were a tiny little team of 3 international members, John, myself, and Adrian, who you can see here in the turquoise t-shirt, with Race Shihad with us and Ashraf as our first inspector. And it was an amazing 5 weeks in September with 55 degrees heat. But that was the start of things. And now we've grown into a team that incorporates almost 100 people. If you include all the experts and people that come and go. Obviously, we're not there all at the same time, thankfully. And this is the team that we had season 15, coming in the first real season after the COVID lockdown. And what we did that season was that we started a new tradition in bringing out all the team, including our workers, to see different temple areas. It was such a great experience. And the same last season when we went to Edfu, part of the team here. Wonderful, absolutely. So a little bit about the site and where we are. Gebel el-Silsila is located in the southern part of Egypt, close to Aswan, and it is divided in the East Bank and the West Bank. Our concession area covers about 30 square kilometers, or 11.5 square miles. I always try to figure out what is what. And the little dots on the upper left picture, they are all the sites that we surveyed and begun the initial work. So, okay. Sorry guys, we got the children at home, of course. So the site of Silsila is primarily known for these monuments, which are the Nile monuments that have been documented and depicted as watercolored images already from the time of Napoleon and forward. It's also known for the spears of Horemheb, as it's called, and there you got our beautiful little dig house, the boat of Sobek. But we will speak about the ground that is beneath there, which is a completely different thing. So we are then talking about the Temple of Sobek, which is encircled here. And this is what it looked like when we started excavating there or surveying in 2015. Of course, we knew about the location of the temple, because it has been mentioned in literature before, but there was no real coordinates or information about its whereabouts. So it was first of all a matter of where is it, and then when we started to see the surface finds, we were given the permit by the authorities to start cleaning, and we were actually given a week to provide evidence that this was a temple, because this is the location where it was planned to build a car park for tourism. And this is what it looked like. And this is, you probably also understand now why it was, we were questioned in saying that this is.
They did, no one believed us. They all said there's nothing there. And so we actually negotiated 5 days.
No, we got a week.
We got a week.
But the fines that we got during that week led to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And then we had enough.
And then we had enough.
Yes. So this is just to give you an overview what it looked like before we started cleaning. And this is the road that was the dirt track that
went through the back.
The locals. And as you can see, 2015, these are the first images that we released for the first press release when we rediscovered this temple. So we knew from the previous sources that they had found some fragments marked with the cartouches of Ramses II. For that, we weren't surprised when we found more of them, but we also found those of Amenhotep III. So already during the first season, we managed to push back what we thought at that point, the initial part of the temple. But then we started to find limestone. And that might not sound so strange for most people, but Silsila is the world's biggest, largest ancient sandstone quarry. And to be in the middle of a sandstone quarry and find limestone details within a temple area amused us a bit. So we now know that the limestone belonged to the temple of to the period of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III. So again, we could push it back a few generations. So from that initial work that we did, we learned that the temple had three main chronological phases. We had Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, and Ramses II. And then there is a big gap. But we have on the surface also Roman activity during the later Roman emperors. But at that time, the temple was already gone. So we know that the temple was dismantled and intentionally destroyed at some point after the Ramesside period. And
still contentious. I don't like the word destroyed, but yeah, I'll let you have that. I think you can get away with that, but yeah.
I did say dismantled.
Dismantled, I like. You can go with dismantled.
But we're also looking at possibility that this temple was used as a quarry for the sake of carrying away the already prepared blocks.
It's more than likely that the temple was, as Maria quite rightly said, dismantled or destroyed, and the block work was taken elsewhere during the latter part, maybe during the Ptolemaic period, and used elsewhere within the area.
One of the alternatives that we're looking at is actually the Temple of Ras, which is south of Silsila, and that fits very well with the Roman activity we got on site. So a possibility. So as we said, when we came to site, there was nothing left. There was only the footprints, the marks left of a building that once stood there. But based on these and the material that we've found, we've been able to establish that there was a colonnade. We have both interior and exterior walls that are indicated within linear marks on the bedrock. We have 4 inner chambers. It had a pronaos and a naos, and that it opened up to the west, which is the Nile, which is stereotypical, what's to be expected of an Egyptian temple. We have found enough fragments from the inner ceiling to know that it was completed. So we have the night sky of note with the dark blue and yellow stars. And that this temple contained both limestone and sandstone details. So this is how it started in season 10. This goes back quite a while when we started working on the western part of the temple. Now this is where there stood a large tree to start with. And as we dug down, we started to find these large blocks, and you can see it's a doorpost that you can see there actually towards the lower part. But in the middle, what stopped our forwardness in the archaeological work was that we had an immense collection of Roman material, and it included this what do you say?
Kiln.
Kiln. Thank you. I lost a word there.
Okay. I'm glad I was able to help you.
But we continued after documenting everything, and the Roman amphorae just kept on coming, didn't they?
That it did.
Oh, that's blurry. But there you can see the tree that I was talking about, and how we then are getting these.
We started to discover the foundation blocks that inevitably would lead us to the pit. But at that time, of course, we didn't know exactly what they were or what function they served. We knew they were part of the temple, of course, but it wasn't until later, after removing the Roman kiln and the remaining spoil from around there, that we began to find the pit itself.
Yes.
And there she is.
And it still confuses us to this day, because the closest that we got is, of course, the shafts in Komombo, for example. But this one does not seem to be a nilometer. There are no linear marks, there's no indications, and what we found during the excavation of this, the top of this pit, was all the debris of the destroyed temple. So we had limestone, we had sandstone, all the fragments, we had all this. You can see the thick layer there of the Roman kiln and pottery.
But you can see also, especially from that, and that photograph there is a perfect example. You can see the stratification. So you can see that the kind of debris was kind of washed in, coming from the east, coming towards the west, and washed into the pit, creating this kind of strat.
So
then
it's
the kiln
when
was built
the
on
Nile
top.
comes
Yeah.
back from flooding there.
But one of the things that we've always said is that the deeper we go within the pit, we will eventually get to the point where the temple, it should show us when the point in which the temple was destroyed itself and actually quarried away, because the pit should be filled with debris and material from that. A couple of seasons ago, when the last time that we worked on the pit, we were able to find rather large fragments.
Architectural details.
We found the window that would have possibly come from the temple or come from the building that surrounded the pit itself. So hopefully in the next coming seasons, we will get even further and find a few
You're
more.
jumping into the future now.
Well, I like to. I sit here listening to you, so I like to jump backwards and forwards. It keeps you on your toes, doesn't it?
So
I go rid of the kids.
what we also found was pieces of crocodile skeleton, and that made us believe, suspect that this pit or den had some similarities to the destroyed temple of Sobek further up, which is it was located between Gebel and Amant, and similar to our site, it had the same time frame, same pharaohs, same type of destruction, and it also had a shaft. If anyone have been to the Luxor Museum, you've seen the famous sculpture of Amenhotep III and Sobek in an embrace. That was found within that pit. So we're looking at that as our closest parallel until such time that we possibly find.
And we will find our own statue.
But so far, we do have indications of crocodiles within the pits. So possibly that they did, that they bred them or kept at least one at a time as their sacred animal. And the excavations continued. It started to get rather deep, and soon we hit the water, and our workers now, bless them, that they say that they're happy to work there during the summer, but during the winter months, it gets too cold, because it's cold groundwater that comes up. And to this point, I think we're 7 meters down, 8 meters.
7 to 8 meters.
Yeah. And as John said, we're just getting up the nice dynastic material from the bottom.
So we've now gone through all the various later periods. We've gone through the Roman, we've gone through the Ptolemaic. Now we're into the actual dynastic part. So we should, as Maria just said, start to retrieve now fragments of architectural relevance.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
So this is something that we're set out to continue when we return.
And because of the spiders.
Yes, that we had 3 cobras and massive spiders coming out of there. One that bit John in his foot, and it caused it was one of those recluse spiders, and he still got bullet hole like scars. If anyone knows anything about recluse spiders, stay away from them. But
Don't
it
get them.
sneaked into John's boot and
Yeah.
it bit.
Hmm.
Anyway.
Moving on.
So before COVID hit us, what we found out from the excavations was that we could confirm that this was a temple dedicated to the crocodile god Sobek as the lord of Kheni. And Kheni is the ancient name of Gebel el-Silsila. We had constructions with limestone details during the time of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III. And it reflects their interest to the site, which also connects to the major architectural change in Egypt itself. So this is why we have such a great interest in Silsila overall. We got 32 cenotaphs or shrines that were produced for people that were active in this region during the time, because it had such a life-changing positive impact on their lives, brought such wealth to the family. So they wanted these their soul to return to this place in the afterlife as well, which is quite nice to know. We have continued building activity during Amenhotep III and Ramses in sandstone structure. Amenhotep III was raised relief, and Ramses II sunken relief. And then we have complete destruction following the end of the New Kingdom. Yes, dismantling. But we also found, so we know from the archaeological material that this was a site of visitation, possibly even cultic activity already during the 17th dynasty. We got scarabs and other details from that period. And we also have a structure, a mud brick structure from the time of Thutmose III. We got his cartouches that surrounded it. And that's something that we're going to continue excavating in the coming season. So this is John's initial topographic plan.
Very old.
It's old, but pretty much still holds with a few new bits to it. This was your initial interpretation. That needs to be updated with the colonnade.
Quite a bit.
And then we started to work in the eastern area, and this was during season 15. So we're the last one that we did, season 16, just so you keep in track on where we are. So 15 was 21, 2020. I'm losing my numbers here. This is what we looked at. Do you want to tell a little bit about work?
Yeah, I mean, basically during, as Maria got confused there, season 15 and 16 sort of change emphasis, because we couldn't really continue with the pit. The pit needs further restoration work on it, internally, to shore up the walls, because they are in danger of collapse, possibly. So what we did was we switched emphasis and went to the east side of the temple. Now, Maria mentioned earlier on in the lecture that previous records have mentioned things like the walls of RAMASES and so forth at the temple. Even Petrie mentioned the wall, and then he said that the ancient village of Kheni was further to the east of the temple.
I thought that was Weigel.
No, it was Petrie. Oh. So what we did was we changed emphasis, and what we wanted to do also in combination with the ministry was to extend the boundaries of the temple and to find, if we could, how far the temple actually extended. So in this particular image, which you can see here, we're working towards the east, but we're moving southwards, and we're extending the temple boundary there. Do you want to go to the next slide?
Yep.
So here you can see we've gone down. Now, what's interesting here on the left-hand side of the image, you see that there's a kind of a dressed wall, and then it's in shade and shadow. That's another pit. And what we started to find was a series of pits dotted all over the place in the temple itself. mainly, of course, within the bedrock structure. Now, it wasn't until later on in last year, season 16, that we were able to identify these pits with actual structure that the temple would have sat there. So the structure itself, like internal walls, external walls, etc., were actually built on top of these pits. So they could actually be ceremonial foundation pits.
So for the last season, we had the continuation of the southern and the eastern side to do, and those are the ones that you can see.
And we also extended the northern, where you can see the two sheikh burials there in the upper part, the two structures. What we've done is we've extended the temple site to just within 5 meters of the two sheikh burials. And then we went through the concrete.
Yes, because the one thing that people need to remember is that the canal that is just south of the temple, that was dug during the 80s and 90s, and they dumped all the concrete and they prepared the concrete there. So we had to go through that with hand. We're not allowed to use any machinery or anything, so everything has to go through by hand, including concrete. And
they literally mixed the cement for the canal on top of the temple. So we had this lovely layer of actual cement and concrete with debris, bits of wood, bits of metal, this, that, and the other, mixed in with it all to get down. And that took us just over 1.5 meters of that debris.
And that's where it comes down to having this amazing team led by Ahmed, our race.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
And continuing here along the eastern side as well, trying to get through it all. And this is what you look like in your face.
Pretty dirty job. Someone's got to do it. Having fun.
Yep. And then, of course, you got Joe. I don't know if Joe is with us today. Joe is our doctoral student who's working on the fragments, and that is the topic next. So these are some of the examples that came up last season. We got the lower part of the place name of Kheni. Here is a detail of an offering act, and it's Amenhotep III because of the style that it is. And here you can see the lower part of Sobek's podium and the tail that comes down in the middle, and then to the right of that is the place name of Kheni. So we've had, even though these are very, very rough fragments, they are enough diagnostic for us to make out where they would have been in the temple and what size they would have been, and also what they would refer to. So there were a lot of reference to Sobek as Lord of Kheni. We also found this gorgeous, although fragmented, of course, Sphinx that we're still trying to figure out what animal it actually was, because we haven't found any parallels. So if there is any one of you who immediately thinks of a parallel of an artifact anywhere else, please contact us afterwards, and we'll be happy to.
It was a crocodile head.
Yeah, it probably was. We also had statuary fragments, so we've had both hands and the face of a statue. This is the statue head we found in season 15, and we've been playing around a little bit with that to try to identify who it belonged to. And looking at a parallel at Brooklyn Museum, this is what it would look like if you put the two together. So it's just an artistic, playful way to look at how you can do it, but that would be then the head of Amenhotep III, which fits with other finds that we have on site. So this is what it looked like.
And this is the interesting part. This is season 16, the end of, and this is our little baby. This is the eastern boundary. This is the foundation of the temple, still in situ, which has never been seen until now. And as Mira's quite rightly said, the guys really worked well, and you can see the stratification again there. But the entire eastern boundary is intact from the return in the north and the return here in the south. You can see we've got the corner blocks. You can see we've got the rear blocks, and it's all in situ. The big thing, and I know you didn't put the image in for this and didn't think about it, was that in the south, in the southern corner, when we were excavating there, we got down towards the block work, which is possibly about half a meter free, about a meter from the ground level, and we just started to hit silt. And there wasn't one fragment of stone, there wasn't a pebble, there wasn't any pottery, there was nothing. It was completely and totally sterile, as if backfilled. And it wasn't until we got to the very base of the stone, the actual block work, that we realized that actually, yes, it was sterile and it was backfilled. The southern corner had been excavated at some point in antiquity. And one of the telltale signs was
not antiquity, but
well,
modern times.
Modern times. One of the telltale signs was at the very bottom, next to the blockwork, on the floor were shards and fragments of the old glass plates used for taking photographs, with the silver nitrate still attached to the back. So we're looking at any possible date around about the mid 1800s up to the early part of the 18th century.
So going into modern day archaeology, contemporary archaeology, which is
wonderful.
Fun. So moving on, it was a bit late to warn you there that there will be images of skeleton. I'm sorry if anyone got scared. There will be images of skeletons because we're talking about the cemetery. And just to give you an idea, we're just talking about Temple of Sobek, and the necropolis is on the other side of the modern canal. And this is the landscape prior to excavation. And it only takes John to kind of persuade everyone that, oh, we're gonna move that. And so we did. This is the state of preservation of the burials before we started. So there are quite a few, almost all of the chamber tombs that we have excavated. We have 33 documented chamber tombs so far, and all of them have been opened since antiquity. There's only 130 that was resealed after the looting during antiquity, but the others, they have been opened since then. So they are in a very poor state of preservation. And what you can see here is the thick sandstone, the strong sandstone on top, and the darker brown areas, that's water damage. So we're fighting against time here. You can see the water issues here as well, where again the light is dry, the darker brown is wet, so it is deteriorating the sandstone in a very high.
And unfortunately, there's not much we can really do about this. The water table at el-Silsila
is an aquifer.
It's a natural aquifer, just drawing the water from the ground. That's both agricultural, but it's also from the Nile. It's also from the eastern desert.
Yeah.
For example, which we'll get to with ST42.
Yeah.
We can talk about that afterwards.
Yeah. So by the end of 2019, before COVID, this is our map of documented areas or tombs. They have now increased up to ST80. So we've been rather busy. So when you work, one of the questions that we usually get when we're talking about the necropolis is how we are in relation to the bones and the individuals that once were buried there. And there are some ethical considerations that we do have to discuss, and it's important also to communicate this with the audience. And this is the remains of what the looters have done. They have opened a tomb, they taken out the mummy because they were wrapped, they burnt it, they took what they wanted and then threw it back in. What we do is that we do not dig for the treasures, but we dig for the knowledge and the preservation. We want to learn, and we treat these individuals with respect. So it's a massive difference. And that is especially important when you work with child burials, at least so I think. And when you work with these tiny little babies, especially, as a mother, I take it on I kind of commit, and before I start, I send out a little prayer to the mother of this child, and I say that I will look after and I will make sure to collect everything, and it is with the intention to preserve and do right. Our intention is that once they have all been studied completely, they will be reburied, and we will do that with a little Egyptian tradition ritual with respect for where they came from. So everything is based on respect and to gain knowledge. So looking at the architecture, we already mentioned we got chamber tombs, we got crypts, we also got what we call overhang burials, and then we got skeletons that have been laid on a plinth or straight on the quarried floor. These are what the rock cut chambers look like. They usually have 1 to 2 chambers with portcullis doors, a courtyard in front, and an offering niche, and that's what you can see to the left here. Then the courtyards, they are sometimes created naturally, but they are usually left with these little separating walls. And what we can see is that the blocks that have been removed from the making of these courtyards have then been reused as sarcophagi. So it's likely that all the sandstone that was removed in the preparation of the cemetery was reused for either slabs or sarcophagi to stay within that context. And we got interior crypts, like you can see here, and there's also exterior crypts. And then we got what we call fissure crypts, where they facilitated a natural geological fissure and then put slabs in the end to close them off. And an example of an overhang is where they kind of tuck in little babies, particularly they place under these overhangs, and they then place small little slabs on top, and usually lots of beautiful colored pebbles.
And please don't forget that the majority of the necropolis in this area during antiquity was flooded annually with the inundation. So when Maria says, you know, the infants in this particular position were secreted into the overhang and then weighted down with block work on top of them, that would have stopped them from flowing away, but it would also stop them from wild animals like crocodiles and so forth from actually devouring them.
Yeah. And then you got the ones that have been placed on a plinth, and there you can see it within a context, or on the quarried floor. And the interesting thing here is that they are on the outside of tombs, but they're still within the courtyard. So it is likely that they are members of that family, or possibly that they are workers, or even we don't like to mention slaves because we haven't seen any direct indications of it, but it is an individual that is connected to the family but wasn't of enough standing to be placed within it. So, and these individuals, they are usually quite heavily, they got heavily injured bodies that have healed, but they have series of injuries that indicate that they were actively engaged in the carrying process of basket carriers, as we call them. The orientation of the openings, it's basically down to the strata.
Yes, it's dictated by the actual stratification of the stone itself, rather than anything that's symbolic. But as you can see here, the way in which the stratum, the way in which the stone flows, the stratification, that determines the doorway and the cut. They also use the normal fracture lines within the bedrock to create these chambers. taking advantage of that, so it's less labor intensive to remove the stone inside.
Yep, smart work.
Smart move, man.
Yeah. We're not going to go too much into the bioarchaeological records, but we got about 100 individuals plus now the water tomb, so it puts us just over 200. We got individuals from fetuses all the way up to seniors, both sexes, and we got animals, including 3 headless crocodiles that were ritualistically placed outside of the burials. But Salima will look into that more closely this next season. Just quickly, they were placed straight on the back or on the side or in fetus position. I think we will rush through this a little bit so we can fit the time that we got. We got indications of textile wrapping, organic wrapping. They were also placed in wooden coffins, in tree trunks, stone sarcophagi. We got ceramic sarcophagi, and then of course the ones that are placed straight on the ground. And this is one of the babies that we found where you got the textile wrapped around it. And here you can see how the reed matting would look like. And this is another child. And sarcophagi, of course. And there you got the beautifully decorated inner part. So moving on to the waterlogged tomb, which has caused some, yeah. It started in 2017, I think, when you marked it out as a little
depression in the ground.
Depression in the ground. And we soon realized that, okay, we got a shaft burial, but we got issues.
Big issue.
Big issues. We had water filling this one. So we know that the tomb, there was a looting attempt to this tomb in 2010, so 2 years before we started, where they went in with heavy machinery and tried to open up. But of course, they didn't foresee that it was water filled, which for our good sake, it stopped them. And this is what it looked like when we came to the bottom, 2 meter wet sand silt. And if you imagine that you got moving water with all the organic material of the internments and all the material that they were buried with, combine that with sand and moving water, it's like having all of this being in a constant washing machine. So it was a true mess to deal with. And you couldn't apply traditional archaeology while working with this, because if we removed all the water, the soil got too heavy and it crushed everything underneath. We couldn't do marine archaeology because of the state of the water. So our only option was to work in blindly, meaning that we had to trust our experience and our hands and follow the skeletons as we found them. And we know that they were buried head to toe yeah. And this is what it looked like when we sifted everything inside. So this tomb contained a lot of different material. Up till last season, we thought that the tomb was intact, but this season now we've got indication that at least the main chamber was looted because the bones had been buried. So there has been disturbance. What was interesting was that all the adults were buried in just wrapping, but we have 3 child sarcophagi, and it was quite emotional to have these lifted, because the men they lifted them together, and we walked in almost as a ceremony, a procession. It was very emotional to bring them up. But as you can see, there were, again, this whirlwind, this washing machine effect of mixing the bones up. So all you can do is really allow it to dry, and then piece by piece retrieve it. And this is the second sarcophagi, which was even worse, but it had some really nice, beautiful pieces like this one. And it's so carefully carved, a little figure of Hippocrates with his finger in his mouth, and the water lily as his symbol. And then we had the golden artifacts, which for us, we don't really want them because they cost a lot of, they increase the risk, because as soon as it gets out, the word always gets out, and then you're in risk of looting, and we don't want that, of course, so we're happy if we don't have it. But there were some absolutely stunning pieces of carnelian, like this Hathoric or sistrum-like piece, and at the back there was a carving of a scorpion. So it's likely that one could just imagine that this person might have been stung by a scorpion, and then the family wanted to protect the soul from being being repeated in the next life. So we got wooden artifacts, glass. There are some, lots of wood, as you can see there, stereotypical amulets, lots of scarabs of different quality. They all date from Amenhotep II till Tutmosis III. And then we got Shapti figurines that indicate that we have reburials, so from the Ramesside period. And then we're moving on to what we did, and this is how you always find John. And people ask why he would be suffering from a thoracic damage to his spine, but he's had so many stones falling in on him, tomb collapses on him, and yes, this is how you normally find him. So ergo,
knew you have to drag me out.
Yes, but we always find his butt in this way. I find myself in sometimes in similar situations. But we finally got to excavate ST10, which has been on the list for a long time, and it was dirty work. This is Haup, our Dutch colleague, who fulfilled his dream of completing this job. And this is what you look like when you've been working within such an environment. But there were some beautiful artifacts that came out, including this eye, steatite, and ivory, obviously belonging to either a statue or more likely the
mask.
Yeah, the mask or the sarcophagus. And we returned to ST42, the water tomb, and this is what it looked like when we came into the second chamber with the pumps working.
Going. Managed to burn our way through 6 pumps that season.
Yep. And yes, you have to love what you're doing, because this is
disgusting work.
Poor Ahmed. He's so dedicated. He does love the work, though. So just as the final bit before we finish off, what we've also been looking at is funerary epigraphy, because none of our tombs are preserved with any form of interior or exterior decoration in the traditional way. We have some of the details like this one. We also got some team marks or identity marks that belong also to the quarry workers. But we got a high amount of graffiti. So we got the Senate board to the left. We got lots of these footprints and sandal prints. And we actually presented this at the conference 2019 in the French Institute in Cairo, and the publication is finally coming out this year. So if you're interested in this topic, you can contact us and we will send you the raw manuscript of that before it's released. But what we found was that we have a high amount of these foot and sandals sandal prints in the necropolis, and we have adult and child prints, so it's of all different sizes. And of course it could be a matter of, well, how do you know that it's a child? Well, if you find a small print next to a large one, it's quite logical to think that we're talking about families here. And we started to see that there is a connection between the burials and the location and the orientation of these prints. So 44 images, they were directed towards the entrance. 7 were aligned with the positioning, the head of the interment. So these are the situations where we have intact burials. But 101 were oriented away from the entrance. So in this case, this is ST50, it's a child burial. And if you look at the picture very closely, they're very crude feet graffiti, but the large ones, they are all oriented towards the burial. There is a small child's foot that is oriented away from it though, going in the opposite direction, away from the burial. And this is also the C forthcoming 2020. It should be 2023. ST44, we got the same thing. This is where we found 2 children. One that was oriented with his head towards the north, the other one towards the east. And the alignment of the feet, it fits perfectly with how they're placed, while the adult feet are oriented towards the burial. ST10 that we just saw, it has a similar situation, but without the baby feet. It's got feet moving either up or down, and they're placed on a vertical. And it's also the relation then, we'll look into it closer here. More examples, feet that are oriented towards the tomb, as far as we can see, they are indications of family members that are either performing an internal votive or a form of funerary act, while the feet that are oriented away from the burial signify those that are dead. So it could be seen as a form of grave markers, if you will. So what we found is that there is this saying in the Book of the Dead where the feet have to present themselves with their names in order to be allowed to move forward. And we believe that the feet and the sandals that are at el-Silsila relate to this part of the Book of the Dead. So we do actually think that they are directly connected with the burials. We know that they are contemporaneous because of the evidence that we have. But of course, it could also be, as Salima Ikram always says, it could also be a manner of the orientation of where the person sat at the time. We all have interpretations, and that's what it will remain. But just to finish off, this is what I've been doing the last season, working on this, and it connects with the necropolis graffiti. This is what it looked like before I started, and I retrieved over 200 new petroglyphs or rock art illustrations and fragments, and this is the documentation of that. Our photographer took a fun image of the throwing of sand. And this is what it looked like when I was finished. And what I was able to find was inscriptions. So we have a team that arrived to the site to Kheni by boat. I also retrieved a beautiful Senet game. So we know that the people sat there actively engaging themselves in different forms. But what I also found that I did not expect was yet another child burial. And it was buried within a very, very narrow crevice. Again, filled with these slabs and in a very poor state of preservation, but that took us up to ST80, which was the last one. So what the future holds, we will continue working in the necropolis,
Yes.
in the temple, with our rock art, and hopefully we will return also to the West Bank.
And hopefully we'll be able to extend the temple excavations further to the south, and finding more or exposing more of the foundation blocks.
Yep.
It is also hoped that next season we're going to start to explore the upper layers, or upper levels, I should say, sorry, of the necropolis, because we do believe that the spoil now of Amenhotep III, or the House of Amenhotep, as I like to call it, has actually buried parts of the necropolis. So it is hoped that by going further up onto the upper levels, we'll be able to go through the spoil and find remnants of the actual necropolis itself, and maybe even areas where there was preparation taking place for the dead, and places where the funerary procession would have started, or at least evidence of such.
We're also going to set out to do some more conservation work, and in agreement with the ministry and our the inspectorate of el-Silsila, we aim to help them as much as possible with preparing pathways and seating areas and so forth for tourists,
And of course,
to
some
be
of,
able to visit.
some of the things that you weren't able to show in this particular lecture was something that excites me more than it excites Maria, are the actual quarries themselves. And within the necropolis, we've been fortunate enough to spend a few hours here and there over the past couple of seasons and removed a lot of debris to reveal what we call surface quarries, which are situated in and around the necropolis. And these are shedding light now on what the area was used, as well as it being a place of burial and interment. It was also used practically to retrieve stone and to export to wherever.
Yeah. So with that said, we would like to express our gratitude for being here. We are depending on we are grateful for all the help we can. So if you feel like you want to help and support the team, please copy the link that's there or contact us afterwards. You can make an incredible difference and allow us to carry out more of the work that we love to do.
And we still have some calendars left.
And yes,
let's push the calendars.
See if that comes. Oh yes, there are some merchandise.
Merchandise. I've got caps, but I've got no mugs.
And the calendar, which is now at a special price because we're already in January. So if you want to order them, they're about 25 English pounds at the moment, including shipping. But
we'd just like to say, by ending this wonderful lecture, is saying thank you to everybody out there, because without you, of course, and without the audience participating, doesn't make it worth it, really. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. I've put those two links in the chat box if anyone wants to go directly to those. But let's go back to a view where we can see everyone, and I will invite everyone to ask questions now. Thank you so much. That was so interesting. Just I'm sure Annette would like to say thank you as well. I'll hand over to you shortly, Annette, but it's given me some ideas to develop the sandstone outcropping in Hastings. Actually, I can imagine some good inscriptions and a bit of rock art there. Now we've got a really nice piece of sandstone overlooking the sea. I think it's a great site for a temple to crocodiles. I just wanted to ask what the proportion of child burials is there. Is it much more child burials than adult burials?
No, but what we find is that we got a much higher degree of intact child burials because they are normally buried outside of the chambers. So there's a lot that have been ignored by the looters because they're simply not in attractive areas. So that has saved them. And therefore we have more of these child burials. It's difficult for us to estimate the relations based on the looted material, but we got of course our bioarchaeologist, osteologist. They've completed all our intact burials, and next season they will take on the intermingled, so basically the leftovers of the looters. But there is a quite high degree of children, and that of course can be explained with the high level of mortality, which is known for Egyptian children.
I was just looking at one of the titles of Sobek being Lord of Seamen, and I wondered if it had anything to do with the proximity to the Nile and the annual flooding and this idea of protecting the very young.
Yeah, and it's not impossible. We could give you a separate lecture on just Sobek, because there's so much that we've learned throughout the years, and we can actually now include a new epithet for Sobek, and we know that Silsila was not his first location to receive veneration within this area. It was actually in Chateau Regal, and we got a paper coming out on that as well. So
excellent, I'd be up for that. My friend's got a doom band called Sobek, so she could probably
nice.
research. So you were mentioning the pit of Sobek, but is that like an offering well, do you think, that there was a live crocodile in it and people were bringing offerings to the god?
Very difficult. It's very difficult to say, Sarah, because as we tried to allude to within the lecture, the excavation of the pit, it gave us the Roman to start off with, and then that pitted out and it kind of dried up and there wasn't much material coming out of it. Then as we went deeper, it starts to change back into the dynastic period. And now we're putting out architectural pieces. We did have the few bits of skeleton remains of crocodiles and so forth. But as Maria quite rightly said, you know, when you look for comparable material, you look to the pits that are at Komombo, for instance, which are more Nilometers. Then you look towards Shadet, you look towards Semoth and so forth, and you look at these pits and what could their function have been? Were they there primarily to hold water, or were they there to keep crocodiles in as breeding places?
And that's the thing, the skeleton might have come in with the flooding.
Yeah.
We don't know
but
yet.
One thing for sure though is with the pit, it did have or still retains that foundation, dressed foundation around it, which would then have had a squared structure on it, because we've got the dress marks actually in the floor. So that foundation had received block work. How high that was it a complete structure? Did it have a roof? Did it have a doorway and so forth? At this present moment, I'm open to suggestions, but I believe it did actually have a structure over it. So that would then allude to it being a pit where they kept the crocodiles captive.
We have found enough material also, of course, of votives and small personal stelae and so forth. We have several votives of the crocodile itself, everything from a tiny little pendant made from a crocodile of ceramic to the beautiful sandstone piece that we had last. And last season also we found a high degree of falcon statues. And that connects us. We believe that there is actually a connection to the monuments produced by Amenhotep III at Silsila, where you got a central falcon flanked by two obelisks. So we see that
There's themes.
There are themes, and it's something that is unique to Silsila. We don't have this anywhere else. And of course, then Sobek is central, but also the resurrection of the pharaoh as the newborn falcon in the horizon. So you can expand that quite deeply and go into the mythology and ideas, religious ideas.
Brilliant. Annette, let me just hand over to you so you can comment and thank Maria and John.
Oh, is that to do with my question that I put up?
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
Oh, all right. All right. Somebody else has just put a little question up as well about rock art. So, yeah. So my little question was, is Silsila actually visible from the tourist route on the boats at all?
Yes, and you are able to visit Silsila not just by boat but by road as well.
Yep.
The site is accessible. The West Bank is open to tourism, has been since the beginning of tourism. One can visit the site and visit the Spios, the cenotaphs, walk along the bank of the Nile all the way down to the Nile Stelae. Yeah.
And we're working with the ministry to open up the East Bank, but we have to
There are certain areas that we've got to make
secure, especially
Yeah.
the burial site, and that's why we're looking at where we have the boundary for the necropolis, so we know that the tourists can walk on a safe place without falling into something.
Brilliant.
I saw that there was a question regarding the status of the quarry workers, and what we can see is that they were well treated. They had access to medical care. They had what we can see in the skeletal remains is actually that the workers had a better diet than the higher ranked family members. They had a very full, nourished.
They had a very diverse
Yeah.
diet, which covered most of the areas of nutrition that one would require.
Plus that, I mean, the one that we excavated, season 15, ST77 was the tomb. He lived well over in his 50s, but he had injuries everywhere, and the wear and tear on his joints and his arms and so forth, they're tremendous. But he lived until his 50s with these injuries, and several of them had been healed with the help of medical care. So and he had a very good diet. So and he was still buried within the necropolis. So they were respected. They were, as far as we can understand, they were treated as a high asset. So we're not talking about slaves. We're not talking about this biblical idea that the Egyptians used slavery for the quarry work, simply because we have to remember that the quarry was a sacred place in itself. To build the temples, each quarry was already dedicated to the gods to whom the stone was destined. So you can't, if we go back into the minds of the ancients, you wouldn't put a slave or a prisoner of war in a context where you're handling the essence of divinity.
No, I think in that respect, any that were prisoners or shall we, the slave word, they were used in the context of basket carriers for removal of debris from the ongoing excavation or extraction of blockwork. The spore heaps are testament to the amount of debris that was removed during the extraction process at any one of the given quarries on the East Bank, for instance, if we use that as an example. And as Maria quite rightly said, you know, we have now the evidence to suggest that these guys, the basket carriers, were well nourished, they were looked after, and they had worth. They weren't just cast to one side, and unfortunately, when they did die, they weren't just thrown into the river.
No, they were wrapped
They were taken care of, and there were people that would have cared for them, especially when they were injured. So you're talking about a community that has care and love in it, and to a certain point, compassion, and respect. And I think that goes regardless of whether they were prisoners of war, lepers, diseased, what have you. This community worked so well at Silsila.
One of the nice things that we found regarding disease is indications of some of the children that died between the age of 5 and 10. where we can see that there are indications of respiratory or long-term disease. They've been buried with nabac leaves, and these are leaves that the people in Egypt still today use to treat respiratory issues. So there are things like that shows that this is a loving and caring community, and everyone had their own worth.
And like me, I have worth. You look after me.
I hope so.
It's a amount of work, I'm sure.
You mentioned nabac leaves. What is that? Is there an English name for that one?
It's blackthorn.
Blackthorn.
Buckthorn. Basically, it's a tree, thorny tree, but the leaf itself has a medicinal purpose that can be used as an elixir for anything that's respiratory. It's
So like sea buckthorn. Yeah, in Sweden.
Sorry?
Like sea buckthorn.
Yeah, it's if my memory serves me right now,
it's the black one, I think.
Yeah, it's more of a muscle relaxant than anything else. But it's not. I mean, it's used all over the Middle East, but it's also used in Europe as well.
Mentioned in the papyri as a respiratory relief, so to say.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Youngmin, for that question. And then what else have we got here? Oh, Valerie asked, when does the rock art date from, and what does it represent?
So we got, if you take rock art from the entire area, and we're talking about 10,000 illustrations. It's a vast corpus. And we got everything from Epipaleolithic, so 8,500 years ago, up to contemporary. But in the necropolis, it's primarily New Kingdom graffiti and rock art. But it all depends on what part of Silsila we're looking at. But within the necropolis, it's primarily New Kingdom, and we can see that it's contemporary with the burials because of the stylistic qualities of certain, like the bovine and so forth, and how they're made. So and also the Synod game. We've written an article with one of the experts on Egyptian game boards, and so we got firm evidence that the graffiti and the rock art was produced at the same time as the burials.
So when is the earliest rock art produced, and is that depicting things like animals and stuff?
All right, yeah. So the earliest rock art that we got is the Epipaleolithic, and then it's generally a matter of geometric signs and images of vegetation. We got our earliest representation of a crocodile from the Epipaleolithic period. Going into the pre-dynastic, it's a vast amount of animals from the savannah, so the Ethiopian fauna, with giraffes, crocodiles, elephants, and hippopotami. There's also a lot of canine and anthropomorphic human figures. And then, of course, it develops. So going into the early dynastic period, we see more and more cattle, and it's a wider spread of breeds. But we're actually working on a monograph together with John Wyatt on the animals in Silsila. So we're hoping by the end of this year that monograph will be going off to the publisher if everyone stays healthy and well. But that's the aim.
Sorry, I just got a parcel delivery there, but yeah, that's amazing. So do you think there's any likelihood that the Temple of Sobek has pre-dynastic roots?
Well, we're actually looking at the stronghold for the crocodiles during the pre-dynastic period is in the area of Chateau Regal, but we got them all over the site, and they are in most locations where you expect them, where there was access to river, or what we have found also a lake. But the earliest reference to Sobek as a deity is in Chateau Regal, and he's not then the Lord of Kheni, he's the Lord of Lake Haru.
I think to answer your question is one has to look at the breeding patterns of the crocodile, not just the Nile one, but the desert crocodile as well. And I think that, as Maria just quite already said, you know, we have the lake, we have the river, so we have both areas that were frequented by both species of crocodile. And I think that man and his intervention, especially during the inundation, going backwards and forwards, the migration between to the two islands, which El-Silsila was during the inundation, as hunting grounds, they would have witnessed this huge breeding frenzy at El-Silsila, and would have witnessed, and with the desert crocodile being more tame and less wild, they would have been able to get closer to it. That would have also, because the lake itself would have brought other animals and other different species, it was a prime hunting location. So I think logic dictates that early man would have seen the habitation of the crocodile in that area and would have venerated it in some way.
But it's actually one of the things that we're looking at doing as soon as we return to the West Bank and Chateau Regal. We're going to see if we can carry out a small test excavation within the lake area to see if we can find any remains of crocodiles. It falls also very nice. We cooperate a lot with Salima Ikram, of course, and her recent article that just came out these days on the two different crocodile breeds. It fits perfectly with what we're seeing in the archaeological materials. So if you're interested in it yourself, we got an article on its way. It's already submitted, but it's not finished for publication yet. But I'm happy to send you the raw manuscript if you want to just have an idea of the animal research that we're doing.
Really fascinating to think that this goes back to kind of pre-dynastic, like very early Egyptian traditions. And
well,
I think
you got the crocodiles depicted both in El Hosh and in El-Silsila from the Epipaleolithic period, so they were already then part of what was important for them to depict. So, and because it is the bottleneck of the Nile, and it would have been, as John said, a perfect breeding ground during the low water.
And also, one has to take into consideration again, logic dictates this. You know, during the breeding season is when the river was at its lowest, so the inundation was lowest. So the lake itself would have been inundated with crocodiles breeding here, there, and everywhere. The lake itself would have been brimming over with fish and other livestock that would have frequented the area for fresh water supplies. So therefore, it dictates that the man would be there hunting and doing his stuff, and there would be this relationship, this interaction between the local crocodile population and early man, pre-dynastic. And so therefore there would have to logically be some kind of relationship taking place there, which we'll hopefully find in the archaeological record.
And what we're seeing is that this lake, it dried out at a time just after the Middle Kingdom. So it's part of this aridification process from the deserts and so forth. And when it dried out, we also see that people, they pull away from Chateau Regal and they move down towards El-Silsila. So more research to come.
Brilliant. That sounds so interesting. And Mustafa asks, as well as, can he join your program? He's a historian and Hittitologist, master student, who is focusing on Egyptian history. I'll put you in touch afterwards, Mustafa. He asks, are there any specific inscriptions that have been found, maybe describing the activities at the temple or who the temple's dedicated to?
Well, we got inscribed material from the fragments that mention that we are talking about Sobek as Lord of Kheni. There are also other fragments, but so far we don't have any inscriptions of any other deity other than Sobek from the temple, but we do have the statues of the falcon. You have to remember, this temple was dismantled to such point that there is nothing left. We got a few thousand fragments, but the rest is gone. So we can only make up based on what we got, and the primary material shows the center of the crocodile, but now also the falcon. So but of course the West Bank, we got the temple of the spears, the rock cut temple that has all the reliefs preserved. We also got the stelae on the West Bank. So there's a lot there to be learned, even if we don't have it in the temple itself.
And did you mention that there has been any evidence of where some of this material might have been recycled in other monuments elsewhere?
Well, we are looking at the Temple of Ras, but unfortunately the Temple of Ras has also been used as a quarry in its turn. It's only got its subterranean chambers and a few of the upper levels left. But because that was built during the time of Trajan, and that is the time when we see an increase of activity just in our temple area, the rest of the East Bank is abandoned from the time of Claudius. So there is this concentration of Roman work during Trajan, when we know that the stone was, when we know that the Temple of Ras was constructed. So it's a bit of looking for a needle in a haystack, but also logic dictates that this is a possibility, but we don't honestly know. It's just a theory.
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
Is there any evidence of Neath or any inscriptions relating to Neath or any signs of Neath anywhere?
On the West Bank. And we got it in the Roman material. We got in May, you can find our first volume in a series that is published by Brill. It deals with the Greek inscriptions on the East Bank, and there is a unique inscription, a Greek inscription on the East Bank that is dedicated to Athena. But it is in fact to Neith, and in her role as the mother of Tutu and as the partner of Chnum. And we can, because of that inscription and the context, we could determine that part of the quarry was actually used for the quarrying of stone to Esna.
Right. Does anyone else have any other questions? Young Min, do you want to ask your question yourself? Because I'm just having a look at yours now.
Thank you. Thank you for a great lecture. And do you think these laborers and so-called basket carriers could share similar religious belief with priests in Kenny? I mean, do you think national cult in Kenny transcends and communicates some kind of religious knowledgement and dogma to household religion in Kenny?
It's very difficult to answer questions of their beliefs simply because we weren't there. But looking at the material at hand and using logic again, Sobek and the activity in the temple would be something that they witnessed every day. So of course they would be aware of it. They would probably also serve that part in one way or another, although not the interior of the temple. But it's such a small community, so that logic dictates again that yes, they would have been aware of it. And I think regardless of where you are on the ladder, so to say, you would share the respect for your environment and those deities that are located there.
It's not like, just adding on to that, it's not like Karnak or Luxor Temple or something of that nature, which had a major enclosure wall and basically closed off the general public from what happened from inside the walls. at Kenny, as Maria quite rightly said, is a very small community. They would have been able to hear with all the five senses, participate in what was taking place at the temple, likewise at the necropolis, likewise within the quarries, likewise within their own habitation and how they worshipped themselves and so forth. And I think it's all one symbiotic relationship taking place at ancient Kenny. And the animal kingdom,
yeah.
you know, the interaction, the relationships between Sobek, the hippopotami, the birds of prey, the scorpions, the snakes, the spiders, and so forth, the whole catalog of it, all of it together, comes together as one massive community. Hence the reason I think why we see these basket carriers being buried also outside close proximity to the tombs. They weren't just discarded. And also the headless crocodiles, don't forget, that were used ceremoniously outside of the tombs themselves. So I think it is all together, it's one massive community. And I think also that lends itself very beautifully why we saw not why we saw it, but how Kenny itself, in the ultimate demise of Kenny, it literally just vanished as if overnight, gone, disappeared, no longer existed, removed from the history, the annals of history. So therefore, the people who were part of that also dispersed, went on their own way, other quarries in other parts of Egypt and within the empire. But as far as ancient Kenny itself, the community, it's gone.
Yep. Until it was revived again by the Romans.
Kind of. What did they
Thank
do
you
for us?
so much, Maria and John. I'll let you get away for lunch now. It's always good to get your Egyptology fix in before lunch, I think. And I would just like to say on behalf of everyone, thank you so much. It was an absolutely fascinating morning. And Annette, if you would like to say goodbye to your RAMASES members, and Maria and John as well, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. So yeah, so on behalf of RAMASES, obviously we'd like to thank Sarah for hosting us today. Much appreciated. Thank you to all our members that came today, and also anybody else. And huge thanks to Maria and John for hosting us today as well. Been a pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're here if anyone wants to reach out, we're here. Just send us an email and we're happy to discuss further.
Yeah, I'll send a follow-up email to everyone that's come today as well when I send the recording out, with all the resources that you've mentioned and your links to your project and fundraiser as well. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Ciao.